Now we have the privilege of, hello, Laura, nice to see you. Now we have the privilege of talking to presidents. And I have the privilege of introducing them. Okay, in alphabetical order. I will be joined by President Connie Book of Elon University. Where's Connie? Okay. President Melissa Gilliam. Where's Melissa? Yep, great. And finally, President Marvin Krislov, Pace University. So let me do a quick introduction of each of them. Thank you all for being here and for having this really interesting, what I anticipate will be a very interesting conversation. Dr. Book was named Elon's 9th president in 2018. She's a communications scholar who specializes in media policy and democracy. That must be very relevant right now. During her tenure at Elon, she has directed significant investments in student health and spurred the development of Health EU, Elon's holistic wellness initiative. Before Elon, President Book was the provost at the Citadel, the Military College of South Carolina. Dr. Gilliam is an award-winning researcher and physician who works at the intersection of medicine, public health, and the humanities to study and promote the well-being of young people. Her research has been funded by NIH, NSF, the MacArthur Foundation, the Ford Foundation, to name just a few. She became the 11th president of Boston University in 2024. I think she is the newest of our presidents, after serving as the provost at Ohio State University. And now, closer to home, Dr. Krislov, a legal scholar who has been a key figure in affirmative action cases heard by the Supreme Court in 2003. This is such an amazing panel. He has served as the 8th president of PACE since 2017. Previously, he served as president of Oberlin for 10 years. A frequent contributor to Forbes, he often writes about and has shown a great commitment to supporting student well-being. Last year, in one of his columns, he called mental health, quote, a societal concern that demands collective action and support. So with that call to action, let's get this conversation going. Usually there's a table. Okay. I'll figure it out. That's fine. So let's get started. We just had such a fabulous panel, as I said, and making the distinction, I've certainly seen this over the course of my career, the distinction between well-being more broadly and the crisis that often we find many of our students in. And so my question is, how do each of you think about the distinction between calling out or identifying the crisis, particularly in this moment, as opposed to staying close to this notion of a larger public health phenomenon? How do you think about that? Please.
I will say that I did not have a lot of awareness. I came through faculty, provost. It's not until I started working more centrally in administration that I started to see the student life challenges. And then actually it was at this conference in 2019 when Zoe and a couple of other scholars presented their research about the challenge colleges have of not being able to intervene earlier. That was my big takeaway from this conference, was that our work really needed to rest in identifying earlier student holistic care and well-being. And of course, most of us have in our mission statement an idea of lifelong learning, of holistic humanity. So it very much was on my mind after that conference, and we were in the middle of strategic planning at the university, where I did put it in the strategic plan, and we have had several years now as a community of trying to reduce the natural silos of a college campus and work cross-divisionally to address this issue. And it is, and to your point, that was 2019 when we set up the structure, of course, what would unfold after that. And Linda, I appreciated your analogy last night about the transformation that happened at NYU as the results of suicides in the early 2000s, is sometimes that crisis
Exactly.
that really motivates a community to act differently and to have transformative thinking. And I will say that the strategic plan did put a pillar in place, but it was the pandemic that caused transformative thinking about how we were going to support students.
Very nice, thank you. Melissa?
So thank you. So I'll start off by just situating you a little bit. Boston University is big. We have 38,000 students. We have 17 schools and colleges. So we're big. We also are at this point, our entering class, about 20% are first generation students, about 25% international. So it's a very complex student population, and we're urban. We interface directly with the city of Boston. So I inherited some really great systems and structures. And so one is we have a chief wellness officer and it is a cross-campus student well-being. And then we also have a health infrastructure and a really excellent clinical program. So we run the gamut from prevention and wellness as well as providing care. And my own perspective, as you heard in the introduction, I trained as a pediatric and adolescent gynecologist, so I've seen the worst of what happens to young people and developing adolescents. And I worked on the south side of Chicago, so I'm also familiar with people who are living in the most complex settings. But my research focuses on health and well-being from an asset perspective. And so I very much believe that you focus on young people's strengths, that young people are incredibly strong and resilient, and that we have to develop that aspect and help young people understand that part. And so if you sort of see that, I think about this as an ecological model with the individual in the center, how we build a strong and supportive, reinforcing community around them, but also think about the roles of our systems, our structures, our policies. And increasingly, and you'll laugh if you've seen Boston University, I'm interested in how the built environment can support students. The reason you laugh is because our built environment is one big, long Commonwealth Avenue with the T running down the middle. But if you look one block over, we have the river, right? And we have this amazingly peaceful setting. And yet we haven't really oriented and had the resources yet to really think about the built environment. So that's on the horizon.
Marvin, thank you, Melissa.
So Pace University is 14,000 students campuses in Westchester and New York City. We have about 40% first in their families to go to college, a lot of Pell-eligible students. And what I have found is that one of the challenges we continue to have is students understanding that overcoming obstacles, whether it's mental or health or others, is natural, and that's part of this story. And so we start from the day students come talking about ways that they can manage stress, ways that they can deal with challenges. And it's something that I teach, a course we have for all first-year students, and we have the counseling center come in. But what we've also really tried to do is give students an array of options, whether it's spaces for meditation or physical activities or peer counselings, so that they can connect in many ways. But I still find that there is a lot of stigma attached to the notion of seeking help. And what we're trying to do is from the minute people come, and I even talk about it in admitted students, and try to talk about it so that parents hear that it's okay. It's okay to reach out for help. We expect that this is normal. And I still think, maybe not all campuses have this sense, but I still sense from the students that I encounter that there is a lot of shame in reaching out and a lot of concern about that. And so I think creating spaces, peer groups, as well as faculty and staff supports is really helpful. And so it is taking it from a context of crisis, but to a context of resilience and student success, and normalizing this is part of the growth experience.
So at NYU, what often happens is there will be a crisis, so there will be a suicide. And in fact, we examine that really closely to ask the question, who might we have missed? And I think all of us are alluding to this. Who might we have missed? An international student, perhaps, who commits suicide, and then you come to, who had never been in counseling. And then you come to appreciate that, in fact, you're missing something, and a public health model becomes crucially important because that student would never, to your point and to everybody's point, would never have come in for treatment. And so we really, I mean, there is this urgent need, as the previous panel highlighted so beautifully and with so many good ideas, to actually reinforce the need for this much broader perspective and outreach. And our obligation as senior leaders of universities to actually figure out, not only concretely, but also to talk about it. So I appreciate you mentioning that. So, and you also mentioned, Marvin, the idea of when people come to campus, when they first start, right? There's so many things that they're confronting in college suddenly. Access to substances in ways that perhaps in their communities they hadn't, or they're dealing with a substance issue already and they need help, et cetera. So how do we think about the leadership role we can play when students first come to campus? What are the many ways? One of them in setting the tone, but are there other ways that perhaps we haven't talked about that are particular to a presidential role that can actually reinforce the support that all our students coming from multiple backgrounds can really feel and see? And this is what students are telling us now, right? You're not saying enough. We don't feel seen and heard. So please, Connie.
Well, I can answer that, Linda, from my own what I do. And, so I do want the students to be able to see me. And for perspective setting, we're a little over 7,000. We're in a suburban, I don't let people say rural, but we're in a suburban part of North Carolina. And it is a largely residential environment. On campus. But I on my calendar, I play table tennis. I like table tennis. Oh. You can talk when you play table tennis. And it was a strategy I used with my son when he went to one-word answers. And, so I play table tennis. First Friday of every month, I'm in the student union, and there's a big marker board, and they sign up to play. I usually win. Which it makes so they have repeat players that come, but it lets you ask questions. How are things going? And just making it visible that I'm stopping what I'm doing to take time to play.
Love it.
And they can see that.
Totally love that.
Yeah.
So we have revamped our orientation, and this will be the first year, and we still have a lot to do. So part of the challenge of working with so many students is that we had orientation throughout the summer. So it meant that students really never met one another. The one time they convened was at the beginning of the year during matriculation, and then at the end, and maybe around lobster night, and then at the end when they graduated. And so now we are having all students orient at the same time, which is, I think, standard for other schools. And then we're starting orientation before the summer, so we're actually starting to reach out to them, or before the school year starts, so we're reaching out to them throughout the summer. My MO in my 6 months has been to be everywhere. The more people who say, I've never met a president before, I'm like, cha-ching, I feel like I've won. Right. So,
nice.
So I went from the University of Chicago, where I spent most of my career, which was a D3 school, Ohio State. I don't need to fill that in for you. But it teaches you the value of athletics and events and other things in building community. So I went from seeing one hockey game when I was in college to going to almost every hockey game, and yes, we just won the Bean Pot. But I'm there. I'm dropping the puck. I'm at sporting events. I try to be everywhere. But I think it's really important for students, and it also, I think, models particular types of student experience. I think this student athlete is an amazing entity, and particularly. At Boston University, where it's really gone through a transformation where now the grades are really, really strong. The athletic experience is really, really high. And modeling and showing students, other students, what this looks like. We also have a huge emphasis on service. And so our student service, that outreach, this caring for the community is a large part of our mission. So I try to really lift up these examples of what students are doing, but also show that I'm there, present, constantly writing letters, sending notes. So it's that type of thing too. And speaking to any student up and down the street, speaking to students, yeah.
Nice.
So I'm going to try not to repeat what you all said.
You
but
don't play
good-
table
good-
tennis,
good.
do you, Mark?
I do some other things, but I'd love to play table
Okay.
tennis with you
Me
sometime.
too.
I like to talk to people, and I always like to say, how are you doing, and is there anything I can do to help you? And I really consider one of my jobs helping our students navigate. Many of our students are first gen. Some of them are commuters. They're working. They're in and out. And I only try to think about how they must feel. Particularly, these are students who've come through COVID, and we know what that means. And so I'm always trying to say, have you been to career services? What are you up to? And so forth and so on. But I will say one thing that we did that was, I think, a good thing. We were pressed to do that by a funder. We said, we want help for our mental health and wellness programs. And the funder said, I want you to tell me what the students want. And so I said, okay, we'll do that. And so we had town halls, we had surveys, and we really listened to them more broadly than any of us individually could do. And through that came some new programs, particularly focused on peer help and peer connection. And I thought that was a really wonderful exercise, and I think to the point of the earlier panel, now I need to make sure we're assessing it well. And so I've gotten a do list from today to try to make sure we're assessing that well. But those are some of the things I think about.
Very nice. So I'm going to shift gears a bit to the question I asked John last night, and one that is certainly on all of our minds, and actually goes way back, whether it's Occupy Wall Street or the Vietnam War, but certainly more recently, campus unrest and this notion that students come to the table with a great deal of frustration and anger, and that's only going to get worse, right? We certainly know that that's what's coming. What is the role for presidents? What do we think the role is for presidents in addressing what is clearly, from my mental health background point of view, a moment of suffering for people, and it shows up in a different kind of way? I appreciate that. But how do we link it to well-being? And how do we think about being able to articulate that? Because oftentimes people take a political stand and then they get mad if you say, well, let's link it to something larger, potentially, or pathologize. So what are your thoughts about the particular role for presidents in this very complex moment? Including last year and into this year, and let's share our thoughts with the audience.
So Linda mentioned that I was the provost at the Citadel, and unbelievably, I do not have a military background. So I learned a lot from the generals, right? And they are preparing people for war, young people, 18 to 22-year-olds for war. And watching the generals interact with the truths of what war cost was really helpful to me in listening, because it was a war, an unknown possibility of war, right? To the point of fear that we were discussing on the other panel, right? It's scary. And I do think one of the things I learned, it's important to say something and to have words in my pocket. And a lot of times
Go into your pocket then.
Yeah, I go into my pocket. But so and that's the expression I've used, is like I need to have some words in my pocket to help me navigate uncertainty and to be able to talk about uncertainty. And here's an example. I will say I will say out loud to students and faculty and staff when they ask me a particularly complex question that I don't have the comfort to provide them, I will say, I'm not sure I have the right words, but I hear what you're saying. And that is, and we are in a difficult time. And acknowledgement, like they hear me, I hear you. That's why I was interested in the listening labs, because there's a lot of power in just hearing and saying, and I understand how challenging this is. And I will often, in remarks generally now, talk about well-being, just as so that it's in my mantra. It's in the water of self-care during these uncertain times and other, in other ways. And there's an acronym the military uses that I share a lot with students and faculty and staff. The acronym is HALT. Don't get too hungry, angry, lonely, tired. And it's just an easy way to remember. And that's not even, we have a framework called Health EU, so Elon University EU, Health EU. And I used to, as a media person, was like, I don't like all those taglines, or I used to kind of think that's not necessary. But I will tell you, the reaction to HALT, people remember HALT. People remember on campus Health EU, and it's a framework that uses Gallup's workplace 6 dimensions, and it's a lotus icon. And they remember, the students know Healthy You, and it's in the water. It's come to our culture, so even it's branded on different buildings. So it just has, so I'll just lift up. I think these practices of intentionality around that, a clear one-word message in that case, or I do think that provides reminders in ways that I had not anticipated.
Nice. Melissa?
So, what to do with the political in the political moment? So, just for context, I was at the University of Chicago, where there is a tremendous focus on free speech. Chicago principles started in the provost's office in 2016, and there it was. There are no safe spaces. You have to be able to listen to these complex political ideas. And the result was students often felt like they were not heard, not valued. People didn't respect their lived experience that might be different than another's. And so, again, that was quite a source of difficulty. You couldn't just ignore that some people had identities or experiences that were not ready for this, the marketplace of ideas. They hadn't ever engaged in that way. Then when I was at Ohio State, what was very interesting is it's a complex, very diverse state. And we had a platform called the Shared Values. And that's what I've actually ended up bringing to Boston University. And the project is called Living Our Values, where I'm 6 months in, so I got it out, right as I got there. And what was challenging is I needed 2 things. I needed the work that I had done at the University of Chicago around civil discourse and listening, but I also needed shared values. And so I'll talk about the shared values in response to what you're saying, which is part of what I think is happening with identity politics is that people get into this is about me and who I am as a person. And we lack a language, a shared language to talk about how something felt, right? So if something becomes, instead of, you did that to me, versus these are the values that we as an institution have decided that we all ascribe to, and you're not living up to those values. And that becomes a very helpful framework or way of dealing when you have power imbalances. So at Ohio State, one of the groups that really championed the shared values were the staff, because they didn't have a language to say what it felt like when a faculty member trod all over them, right? And so it kind of externalizes what, takes the emotion out of conversations. So we're moving forward with that, and then also trying to build a framework for civil discourse. It does need to be authentic to the university. So at Ohio State, it was much more about what it meant to be a land-grant institution, our commitment to service. At the University of Chicago, quite frankly, I went over to our business school, took the behavioral scientists and said, listen, how do I take these economic principles and behavioral science to help people understand where they might have biases and barriers to listening. How do we actually check whether they really have the truth as we know it, and where do our behaviors and tendencies get in the way? So we'll find something that is authentic to Boston University, and we have some tremendous traditions because we have the Center for Common Ground, which is Howard Thurman's work, which is where we can have discourse about difficult topics. But I think you hear the through line, which is trying to externalize this, that this is not personal, this is what it means to live in a shared, complex environment. And I think it's so critically important because very few people have this experience, right? There are very few places where we have this rich diversity and where we're trying this complex experiment, which society after society has failed. And so getting it right and trying to couch it in values as opposed to this is who I am and you must see me and must insist upon that, that's a shift we're trying to make.
Melissa, thank you for reminding us the value of higher education. Sometimes it's hard in these times to remember, so thank you.
Thank you.
Marvin.
Yeah, so similarly, our motto is Opportunitas, which means opportunity. And so I just gave a State of the University speech and talked a lot about our values, our enduring values that are the same when we were established in 1906, and talked about that in terms of being very inclusive, seeing everyone, hearing people, creating a sense of belonging. I think you raise a really good point, Melissa, that sometimes I think staff and some faculty do not feel included because we are so student-centered, and I think it's important because a lot of faculty and staff feel that they are being hurt right now. And, as presidents, we have to take in everyone's hurt, everyone's anxiety, and somehow we need to find, I think one of the questions you might ask us, Linda, is how do we take care of ourselves?
Yeah, that's next, actually.
And I'm still working to find that one out. But I will say on the political side, one of the things that we've done that I think has been good, I don't want to overstate it, is we created an inclusive task force to look at policies that are coming from the federal government. We did this very successfully during COVID, and it allowed us to create a sense of not only inclusion, but ownership, that it wasn't just a top-down sort of thing. And I think that that's the way we often do govern in our communities, and I think that trying to have that during this very challenging time is helpful, at least in giving people confidence that their voices are being heard.
So time check, where are we? Okay, no, let's do this one last important question, which is how do we take care of ourselves? Please, give us insight, Connie.
Table tennis.
Table tennis.
I do think the whole thing is, I use that, that about my own, getting enough rest and being entirely ready to be present. And then acknowledging that we're not alone in this, that we all have teams, that it's not dependent on us, as my friend says, figure it out. It's like we live in this figure it out world, and that we're not alone in that, and that good ideas come from all across the teams. And it gives me a lot of comfort to intentionally lift up that good work. I actually have an exercise on Friday afternoon. I call the parents of one student who's done something really incredible. And it's a 5-10 minute phone call. They usually start crying, but it is so, I want them to know you did a fantastic job, and this is a fantastic human being that's really doing something remarkable on behalf of our university. And it's been a great practice, and I've really enjoyed it.
Okay, I think
It's all for me.
we're all adopting that one. Okay, Melissa?
So first of all, I'm so happy to be here because I'm learning so much. This is great. So I'll answer this in two ways. The first is I trained initially as a general surgeon and then switched to OBGYN. So I am used to really quite an intense experience. I mean, I was at the time when it was every other night, and the night that was every other, it was 4 hours of sleep. And I tell you that because it's really important for me not to think that people are used to the workload and the speed and the intensity that I am. And so I have to be really thoughtful about that because I'm kind of like, go, go, go. One of the things I do is I try to channel it at different people, so nobody is as manic as I am. But I do take it very seriously. I take physical well-being seriously. I have a treadmill under my desk, and I try to model it for other people. I tried to hold off on my first board meeting, my first EXCO meeting on Zoom, but nope, just turned it on and started walking. But I think it's important, right? And I found that modeling the behavior, they see that I'm out walking, they see that I'm reading books, they see that I do all of these other things around my own wellness, my own health, my own well-being. And I am a calm person. And so I do think, especially at this moment, people are really looking to us and to leaders to set the tone. And so I'll come out of meetings and people write, your optimism makes me feel so much better, right? So I do think that, yes, there's a certain amount of taking care of ourselves, but know that by doing that and being in a good space, people are just depending on it. And the last thing I will add is that right now I have people I go to do a leadership talk or whatever they ask me to come and talk on, and they say, we are so burnt out. We never recovered from COVID. Mm-hmm. So many of us live in Los Angeles or North Carolina or whatever, our people had friends that went down on the plane in DC. I mean, it is relentless. And now we have executive orders. So we are asking our faculty who are stressed out and our staff who are stressed out to take care of our students who are stressed out. So this is a really big deal. So I reached out, I just said to student health, wellness, our faculty affairs, I was like, you guys have to get together and come back with an even better and even more resilient plan, because we are about to enter into something that is very different than anyone has ever seen before. So I don't know what they'll come back with, but I do think this is a different moment.
Yeah. I like to exercise a lot. I also like to try to put distance between my work life and my personal life. And I think that's really important. So I try not to talk about work at night or when I'm with friends. I also do think that helping others, for instance, people, whether they're in Los Angeles or whatever it is, and recognizing what privilege we do have. Yes, there's a lot of pressure, but we have, for the most part, jobs that are immensely rewarding, that are reasonably well paid, and we have the chance to feel that every day we're doing something good to make at least somebody better off. And that is a great privilege, and very few people have that. And so I try to remind myself, be grateful for what you have. Don't focus on what you don't have or the certainty that you might have longed for.
Very nice. We'll leave it on that note. Let's open it up for one or two questions. Michael?
So, I guess I have a question about one of the
This is Michael Schill from Northwestern, for those who don't know.
Oh, thank you. One of the things that's, I think, going to be in the offing, along with a lot of things, is, and related to student welfare, is our affinity spaces and how important they are to groups of our students, and also what we're going to be hearing from Washington with respect to them. Have you thought at all in ways that you're comfortable talking about? And as I understand, sometimes we're not comfortable in public places talking about everything. Have you thought about how you can protect those spaces from what is coming from the executive orders?
Who wants to go first?
I'll jump in, since Michael and I share the legal profession. I think one of the big questions, and this is all off the record, right?
Any reporters in the room? Let me just confirm. No.
I think one of the big questions we're all struggling with is names, right? And whether we change the names or we keep the names but say access is open to everybody, which presumably we all do. And I think that is the big question. And I think we're all going to have to make decisions based on our particular campuses and the climate. whether the name itself needs to be changed. I think, at least for me, BSU is open to all students. LGBTQ Center is open to all students. The Women's Center is open to all students. We have a unit called the Women's Center, Women's Justice Center, which protects women who, and others who have been subjected to domestic violence. You know, do we need to change the name? So I think a lot of this is about name as opposed to the breadth and access to service.
I'll echo that, you know, we already are fully compliant with Title VI and Title IV on our campuses, right? And I will say that I'm in the middle of a lot of reading about imagination. And Dr. Tim Eatman, who runs the Honors College at Rutgers, talks about this if anybody's been to any of his presentations. But I'm more focused on process right now, should something happen, than an outcome. And I want that process, if it comes to pass, the process needs to engage our full imagination. And he argues that what we're suffering from is a shrinking imagination in the United States and around the world. Some of it device-driven, which John Haidt mentioned last, you know, that you're elsewhere, the MIT observation. You know, so what I'm trying to do is create space already in my head. What is the process going to be that allows us to fully imagine a different way of doing things? And to that end, I think the values will be constant. Right, the values will be constant, but the way we deliver them structurally, how we talk about it, and will look different. But the values, the relationships, the importance, the evidence, the scholarship, it's all there, right? So, but it's going to force us, and I want that to be a positive. If we have to reimagine, then imagine. It's open, fair game. What that imagination may take us.
So I'll just add, we don't have a lot of identity centers, and I'm pointing to Crystal Williams, who's president of RISD, but built much of the infrastructure for our community and inclusion work at Boston University. Prior to that, we have the Thurman Center, which is very long-standing around common ground. And so we've been an institution that has traditionally taken a pluralistic, ecumenical approach to identity centers. So it's an interesting position to be in, because you have to start to think, well, how do I support individual identities without identity centers? And one of the tensions for me has been, if this has been our history for 180 years, now students, or last year, students were demanding identity centers, it felt inauthentic to the history of the university to suddenly add what we hadn't had before. So just to give you context.
So the only other thing I'd add is, having spoken with many lawyers now about the direction of where this might go, I agree on the imagination point. You know, there's going to be a very, I think, and hope, maybe I'm too hopeful, narrow set of things we're probably not going to be able to do. But the rest is going to be a lot of relabeling and thinking differently in new ways about how to reimagine the work. And so that gives me comfort. Maybe I'm deluding myself, but actually in conversation with very smart people who are thinking about the EOs and have read every word of them, that it really, and once I had that image in my mind, which is, okay, a really small, you know, skinny swath, and that's okay, we'll figure that out. And so much more to reimagine, that the possibilities, it didn't feel like we were locked into something and this was the end of the world. And in fact, that is our job, which is to find the possibilities inside what feels like very scary times, and to manage the fear, which was Zoe's point. And for me, I'll just end on this point, you know, after last year, which was incredibly trying for so many of us, the idea that I needed to figure out how to self-regulate so that I wasn't reacting to everything every single second as it was coming was really a transformative moment for me. Meditation, talking to Zoe, talking to the team. You know, there are many, many people in our sphere to help us get through this. And all of you know who they are. You should surround yourselves with them, have them on speed dial, And all that's to say, boy, there is so much wisdom here in this panel and in the room, and enjoy each other. Thank you.
Good night, Taylor.